Watching international news about the US sometimes feels like getting updates about that annoying kid who keeps putting their feet on the table. Countries are even issuing travel advisories about trips to the US. I'm signed up with STEP with the US Department of State. It's a free program where Americans get their travel advisories. Last year, it was really helpful with information about registering and voting abroad. For the most part, Spain stays at a level 2, right along with the UK and Italy and France, Germany, but a bunch of the countries that border Ukraine and Russia are at level 1 because that makes complete sense, right? During COVID, Spain moved between a level 3 all the way up to a level 4. I haven't looked into it, but I assume that was the case for everywhere else. Initially, I started hearing about travel advisories on TikTok. I use TikTok as sort of an alert system for US news. The news here does talk about the US, but unlike what some may think, it's not the priority. The TikTok feed seems primed for breakout news stories. It's where I heard about what's going on at the Krome detention center in Miami. Growing up there, everyone knows about Krome, immigrant or not. It's deeply connected to the Cuban population in South Florida. One time after a trip to Spain, my husband could have ended up in there. We had just finished a trip visiting his parents. We'd arrived to the airport in Asturias for our 7 a.m. flight to Madrid, and the agent asked him for his green card, and he couldn't find it. She wasn't going to check us in because he didn't have it. Once he had his green card, he was no longer eligible for the visa waiver program. She did let us travel to Madrid, however, so that we could get our butts to the embassy. And once we were there, we hightailed it to the US embassy. And for whatever reason, the wait did not take very long, and we were assisted very promptly. The good news was that he would be able to travel back to the States without his green card. The bad news was that it would take about a week or two. I went to the US with our daughter, and he stayed back in Madrid in a hotel. When I got home, I discovered where his green card had been. It was secured and tucked away in our safe. I had to call a special phone line to verify his information, and after some effort online, I was able to verify him. The next morning, he booked it to the embassy and queued for hours and hours and hours. Finally, it was his turn, and the agent remembered him from the day before and explained to him that nothing would be ready. And then she gasped. His travel was approved. Soon after she provided him the paperwork that he needed so that he could fly out, she told him that he would be pulled into secondary screening once he made it to immigration, and he flew home that day. At Miami Airport, he handed the immigration officer his paperwork and his Spanish passport, and then he was immediately escorted to secondary screening. He described it as a vast room filled with chairs and people, lots of people, people resting, people in tears, people pacing, an enormous amount of people. He was surprised how we'd passed through that airport so many times but never noticed this room. We speculate that the distance from immigration to customs is likely a reflection of the size of the secondary screening room. It's always at the back of our minds whenever we travel now. When he was being held, he noticed a sign that said to turn off cell phones, so he reached for his phone to turn it off. Before he could toggle it off, he was being yelled at to not touch his phone. Immigration officers, they hold an immense amount of power, so he refrained from explaining and put his phone in his suitcase. In this room, there isn't really a way to measure time. Phones are off. He didn't notice a clock. There's not televisions playing like at the embassy. It's people and chairs. One side of the room is lined with booths with immigration officers. My husband estimates that he was there for about 30 minutes. He said his officer welcomed him home and then quickly let him enter the US. And those who don't pass like he did, they get to go to Krome. And Krome seems to be overwhelmed with people traveling to the US getting caught up in this net of deportation quotas. I found this video about what's going on at Krome on TikTok. That prompted a search for more information, which led me to a local news story, which led me to a local newspaper story from a month prior. And this is all before it became national news. This is also how I was able to learn that not only are judges being suppressed, but lawyers too, all before it became national news. For me, TikTok is the easiest way for me to sharpen how I consume information. It really floods our screens faster than we can process it. And critical consumption is not a choice. We have to navigate through conspiracy theories and emotionally charged headlines. Media is designed to captivate and persuade and sometimes mislead us. But media literacy is a toolkit that we all should use daily. Every piece of media has an author, and every author has a motive. Before accepting a claim, ask yourself, who created this? Is it a reputable news outlet, a verified expert, or is it an anonymous account? Investigate the creator's credentials, find sources, or potential biases. I've put some fact checking and bias sites that I use in the video description. Media thrives on our emotion for clicks, and before sharing or reacting, I pause and then I ask, why does this make me feel whatever emotion I'm feeling? Emotional content often bypasses logic, so we have to train ourselves to recognize our triggers. Fact checking is sometimes quite painful. Sometimes it takes more time than I have the patience for. I use Google image search to see if a photo is outdated or doctored. I cross-reference statistics using qresearch.org or data.gov. There are also fact checkers like factcheck.org and AP News Debunking Hub. If we're talking about a bill, I go to congress.gov to check it out myself. Media is rarely neutral. Ads, political posts, even documentaries use persuasive techniques to influence you. I'm doing it right now. I'm trying to influence you to be more media literate. Recognizing tactics helps you to resist being manipulated. Confirmation bias is definitely tough to overcome. We all want to favor information that aligns with what we believe in. No matter how frustrating, I seek out opposing viewpoints. I just can't manage to watch Fox News anymore. I could do it all the way up to 2017. And now I just look at breaking points on YouTube for an alternative perspective, even though the conservative guy is really frustrating. Watching him turn into a pretzel to justify what's happening right now has been a little satisfying to watch, I have to admit, but I can't watch too much of him because sometimes he makes me want to knock out his cap teeth. I make sure when I do my daily TikTok scroll for news that I don't linger on a specific story too much. I want to keep the algorithm sending me fresh news to dig into. I know that my feed is much different from people in the States, and that's because I'm on the European server. I started using TikTok in the fall of 2019. I used it as a cope for work stress, and after a while, I spent too much time on the app, so I deleted my account. When I moved to Spain, I started feeling a bit disconnected from the States, so I created an account after I was here. So when the app went down back in January, I didn't lose access. My feed is on the servers. I think they're in Ireland. I curate my feed. I block accounts that I've determined provide trash information. I follow accounts that are providing information that I can trust, not just news accounts though. People who are in spaces where they have a perspective, they can offer information in advance of news actually breaking. And this isn't about doubting everything, it's about retraining yourself so that you can think critically. I integrate these steps into my daily routines. I want to make sure to become less susceptible to manipulation. My greatest weapon is a habit of curiosity, a healthy bit of skepticism, and a lot of empathy. My attention is too valuable for me to hand it over blindly. The information I consume works kind of like an upside down funnel. It starts with social media, TikTok, YouTube, Blue Sky. YouTube, I gather through the recommendations feed. Blue Sky, I focus on the people I follow, along with the Discover tab. And if I were in the States, I'm not sure I could have a TikTok For You page like the one that I have here, but I would definitely try my best to make one. I'd start by creating a new TikTok account with the goal of not being on the US server. I'd use a VPN service that is outside of the 14 Eyes Alliance so that I didn't have to worry about my information being shared with the US. Then, after clearing the history on whatever device I'm using, I'd open a new account using the VPN to mask my location, and then I'd start the scroll. Personally, I'd use a separate device for this. I would set it to be a different country, the home location of the device, because I want you to remember, apps on your device share your data. If there's a topic that I want to know more about, but an article isn't linked, I use Google to search. I haven't found a search engine that I like better just yet. I use Encosia and DuckDuckGo sometimes as well. When I search, I do a few things to ensure that my results aren't limited as they would be in the US. I use an address outside the US, typically google.es. I make sure that my VPN is on as well. This was helpful when I was searching for information on the Veterans March last week. There was very little information when I used google.com, but there was more once I switched to google.es. Even though there are a lot of steps to my strategy, I consider it to be passive. It's consumption core at its finest. These are things I can do while I'm queuing or brushing my teeth or just waiting for water to boil. I also employ active strategies using traditional media. My approach uses resources from within the US and across the world. I prefer news and video, but written articles generally have more resources, and that makes verifying information much easier. Some of the traditional media that I enjoy are BBC, DW, Al Jazeera, Euronews, Sky News, France 24, The Guardian, CBC in Canada, Reuters, and Associated Press in the States. I follow them on Instagram with alerts so that I can be notified of new news stories. This way, I don't have to scroll the feeds or go to their web pages to see what's new. Whenever I go to a website, I become overwhelmed with too many options, and this method, it keeps me from burning out. These sources I also follow on YouTube, along with some independent media channels. I do find independent media overwhelming because it's often filled with commentary, so I tend to watch through the initial story and then click out of it. I do have a free subscription to Dropsite News and Business Insider. Both of these are from the States. These come into my email each morning. I grew up with a stepdad who had CNN playing all day, all the time. And the first time I lived in Spain, I used to watch CNN International. It was a very passive activity. Consuming news should never be passive. So even though I have news sources I enjoy, I try not to ignore sources that lean away from my values. Sometimes you learn about the thing that you need to hear in order to be prepared for something. My husband and I, we keep getting asked how we knew to leave the US almost 3 years ago. For a long time, we've had a hard time answering this question. We couldn't really pinpoint it. And then we realized that we're comfortable seeking out ideas from places that make us uncomfortable. Watch this. Otherwise, watch this because it's a vibe. Okay, bye.